We'll now start building the playlist project, and this time we introduce React. I'll detour the JavaScript code we wrote last time, and keep index.html as it is. To use React, we'll have to import two libraries, React and ReactDOM, which we'll take from Unpackage, a popular CDN that hosts various libraries. If you now go to the browser, load index.html, then open the DevTools, and go to the console, you can see we have two new properties on the window object, React and ReactDOM. Since window is the global namespace for JavaScript variables, we can just reference them as React and ReactDOM without any mention of window. Now that we added the libraries, we can start building a hierarchy of React elements, similarly to how we built a hierarchy of DOM elements. Since our application has a header, we'll start by implementing this header as a div. For this, I'll call createElement on the React object. The first argument is the element type, for which I can pass a tag name such as div, ul, h1, or any other tag name supported by the DOM. In this case, I'll pass div. The second argument is a JavaScript object that specifies the element's properties such as ID, class name, or style. The rest of the arguments are the element's children. The function can take as many child arguments as it needs. Let's console log the header to see what createElement does. I switch to the browser and refresh. You can see that the object contains a property named type, which corresponds to the element we chose, and another one called props, which has as keys the properties we passed as the second argument, plus another key called children, populated with the children we gave as the rest of the arguments. The hierarchy of React elements can get much more complex and nested. Right now we have a div with a class header that contains the text playlist. This is the application title, and I like to separate it from the other elements, so I'm thinking of wrapping it into a div of its own. To do that, I'll replace the third argument to createElement with another call to createElement. This call also takes a div as its first argument. I'll add a class name of header title, and the text playlist will now become the child of this new element. Let's also see the hierarchy in the console by logging this header object that React created. See this outer div, and if we expand the props, under children, you can see the second nested div which contains the text playlist as a child. You might have noticed that although we have created this object, the page is still empty. This is because a React element is a simple JavaScript object. We haven't yet told React to transform it into something the browser can display on the page, namely a DOM element. For that, we used the second library we added to the project, ReactDOM, which transforms React elements into DOM elements. Once the transformation is complete, ReactDOM will need a place to attach the DOM elements into the document. Let's create a div for that. I'll open index.html and create a div with the ID root. I'll also add a class root for styling purposes. Back in our JavaScript, we can now get a reference to this root div then call ReactDOM.createRoot and pass it as an argument. This creates what's called a root, which tells React that the parent of our entire application will be this element. Finally, we render the application into the div by calling the render method on the root we just created. If we refresh the page now, you'll see the element appeared. Let's see what the DOM looks like. ReactDOM did a transformation from React elements to DOM elements and placed them under the root element. So, to recap, React is responsible for creating the hierarchy of React elements, and ReactDOM is responsible for transforming them into DOM elements and rendering them on the page. At this point, you might have two questions. First, why have two libraries instead of one? And second, why create React elements only to transform them later into DOM elements? To answer the first question, React creates a description of elements, and this description can be rendered on multiple platforms. ReactDOM renders them in the browser, but there's also an option to render them as an HTML string, which can be statically served, and there are other libraries such as React Native, which render React elements as native controls on mobile platforms. The answer to the second question will become clear shortly, once we talk about the virtual DOM and state. In the next video, however, Let's go a bit deeper into React object properties and their similarities to the DOM.